Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, one you love the most, Niall Hassan, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth. Back once again with my boy, AJ Ponciano. AJ, we were just talking about the Tommy DeVito news in New York. I mean, I guess you kind of relayed it to me, but what are your thoughts on the whole situation?
I mean, it's understandable. I think Drew Lock obviously has more potential to be the quarterback there for the future, but everyone loves Tommy Cutlets. He's New York. He's from New York kid, Italian. I mean, that's just the style of New York right there. I mean, they love him. Tommy Cutlets. I mean, he went on a pretty good with his little version of a Lynn Sandy run there last year. I mean, didn't actually do that well, but everyone just loved him either way because of his name and how he still lives at home and his mom makes his bed and all that. But I understand the start. Honestly, if he has a bad week, I wouldn't be surprised if they move on to Drew Lock and just check out the quarterback room as a whole.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. Obviously, I was joking with AJ. Like in Dynasty, I literally put down $1 because we do blind betting for waivers. Like 2 weeks ago, I put $1 down on Drew Lock. I was just thinking that Daniel Jones was going to get benched. And now, of course, they just skip over Daniel Jones. They go straight to Tommy DeVito. And I'm struggling because I traded you my third quarterback and it's super flex league. And I want to have like a for sure third quarterback option. But if I go spend money on Tommy DeVito, who's to say that Drew Lock's going to be the next quarterback next week? I mean, just you don't know. What I might do is I might just have both of them and then just kind of see what happens from there. And that way I can for sure have a third quarterback. But regardless, anyways, we are back. We are now in week 12 of the fantasy football season. Hard to believe that we have kind of ventured over to this position. Kind of sad, really thinking about it, because that means that fantasy is coming to an end. I think there's like 2, 3 weeks left in your fantasy regular seasons before playoffs, if you're even making it. And before I know it, the NFL season will be over as well. But enough pity party. Let's go ahead and do our Thursday night special as we have an AFC North showdown. The Steelers traveling to take on the Cleveland Browns. Should be a fun, intriguing matchup. We have our starts, sits, sleepers, and busts for this matchup. We'll go ahead and give you guys that today. So without further ado, AJ, go ahead and give me any starts that you may have in this matchup.
Yeah, so I really like David Njoku here. Njoku's been that safety blanket. I know if you look at last week when the Browns played the Saints, Jerry Jeudy had that big game. But if you take away that huge touchdown that he had, I want to say it was like a 65-yarder. He still had a solid game, would have been 6 reception, 80 yards. But he finished, or 5 reception, 80 yards. But he finished this game 6 reception, 143, and 1 touchdown. I don't expect him to come close to that. Njoku, 8 receptions, 81 yards. Like I said, he was just that guy right there that not crunch time, but because it was kind of out of hand, but towards the end. But it was one of those guys that he consistently targeted. I want to say he was close to like 14, 13 targets on the day with 9 receptions. And one of the things we know about James, he's going to throw a lot. Last week had 46 pass attempts for almost 400 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Against the Steelers team that's really good, a lot better defensively than the Saints. I expect them to be throwing even more. I mean, probably 46 is probably where Jameis will cap out, but the pass attempts I think will be there. Also, with the Steelers defense, they have only allowed 9 passing touchdowns to 11 interceptions, so I wouldn't expect a touchdown here. The right in the middle pack, 2,300 yards. But like I said, I think the Browns will be playing from behind, and they're going to have to throw a lot. And with that, go with Najee Harris. I expect Najee Harris to have a big game here. The rush defense wasn't the best against the Saints, but it wasn't bad also. Myles Garrett was really shut down against the Saints. The Saints, Alvin Kamara was 16 carries, 67 yards, but then we saw Taysom Hill out that Wildcat formation have 138 yards on 7 carries and 3 rushing touchdowns. So that's one of the other things. I get it's Taysom Hill, it's a little bit different that they're going to see, but they just haven't. Browns haven't been that good. 14 rushing touchdowns so far this year, just over 1,300 rushing yards. Najee's proven that he is going to be the RB1 there, even though they're not going to re-sign him. They declined his fifth-year option already. He's been out carrying Jalen Warren by almost double the carries. I want to say he had 14 carries, 15 carries last week, has another solid game, and Jalen Warren only had, I want to say it was like 7 rush attempts. They both had the same amount of receiving yards, so it wasn't like, oh, we're using Warren as a like, receiving back. I believe they both had 4 receptions as well, right around the same amount of receiving yards. I think Najee has proven that he's been really good all year, and I think you just have to stick with it. I get the Browns defense has been solid overall, and one of their best parts of their defense has been that defensive line linebacking group being able to stop the run, at least control the run a little bit more. but they were very demoralized last week with Taysom Hill, and then also coming out with a short week with a divisional matchup that's going to be outside. It's going to be out in the cold. I expect a lot of just ground and pound offense from the Steelers. It's kind of how they've been doing this past week against divisional opponents.
So I have three starts. The first going to be famous Jameis. I know I called him a bust last week. I really didn't think he was going to perform well, but he did. 30 for 46, 395, two touchdowns against that stifling New Orleans Saints defense. But he looked good overall. I mean, firsthand. And I think part of it too is the fact that he was returning to New Orleans as far as his, game back. And we did mention that was a possibility. So could this be a little bit of a false narrative that Jameis Winston's back? Yes. But I'm gonna write on the fact that he isn't because I like when Jameis Winston does well. I don't think he's going to nearly put up the numbers that he puts up there because the Steelers have probably the best defense, or at least top three defense in all of football. But I definitely think if you're in a deeper league, he could be an option for a start just because of the upside that he really does have passing the football. I mean, with that Browns offense, he threw for 395 yards and two touchdowns. The biggest thing is he's done this before. There's also games, though, where he does the opposite. He throws a lot of yards, but he throws like 4 interceptions. So which Jameis are you going to get week in and week out? I think that's a little hard to gauge because you just don't really know. I do think moving forward, though, it'll be really curious to kind of see what happens with them and potential successes they do have down the line. But Jameis Winston is definitely a guy I think people should have their eye on, especially going into this matchup here against the Steelers after the week he had. Secondly, I'm going to stick with the Browns here, and I'm going to go with Nick Chubb. Now, Nick Chubb has not gotten to the volume that we've expected to him to come back from his injury. He also only had 11 carries compared to the 15 and 16 the 2 weeks before that. Still has that one touchdown the first week, but I think this could be a good opportunity for Nick Chubb to kind of get his feet wet. It's a Thursday night game. Thursday night games, running backs as such as Nick Chubb and people that have gone through the same things that he's gone through typically do have success. And the inability for the Browns to get the running game going has really kind of struggled with them. But overall, the running game was better, at least from Nick Chubb's perspective. He has highest average yards per carry. He doubled his previous high, which was now 4.5 last week with 11 carries for 50 yards. I think that running game really kind of puts in the mix and has success moving forward. Biggest thing is, can he sustain that? Can he get in the end zone? And can Jameis Winston help provide him to get into the end zone? I think all three of those things definitely do happen. And Nick Chubb, we're looking at the end of the week as a guy that was kind of a sleeper, but we should have known all along there was a start, just strictly off his talent. And finally, I think this is an obvious one, but Jerry Jeudy. Obviously, Jerry Jeudy had a great week last week. 6 catches, 142 yards, and a touchdown, a sweet 88, 89-yard touchdown from Jameis as well. But Jerry Jeudy has been a guy that, Jameis Winston has really looked to. I mean, the last 3 games, 6 catches, 7 catches, 5 catches. Last 2 games, 11 targets. Game before that, 8. And we knew this going into it. He's had a really good year so far overall, particularly the last 3 games. I think that continues going into this matchup against Pittsburgh. I mean, Jameis Winston, I think a lot of people was expecting Jameis Winston to throw the ball to guys like Cedric Tillman. He just didn't. Jerry Jeudy is his guy. So I'm going 3 rounds here, kind of heavy in this matchup against Pittsburgh. I think it's a perfect opportunity for them, especially at home. They've had a very bad season to kind of get some momentum and bring the dog pound up and going. All right, what about any busts?
Yeah, so I'm going to be
Or
on the other
sit, sorry.
side.
I don't know why.
Yeah, for sits. I'm going to be on the other side against Nick Chubb here. I don't think Nick Chubb's going to do that well. I know how you mentioned that his yards per carry or per attempt were a lot higher this game. The Saints defense has been horrible. They're bottom 5 right now in the NFL for yards given up, just under 1,500. Granted, and with 12 rushing touchdowns, and they give up 5 yards per carry, which is one of the highest in the NFL. The Steelers defense, on the other hand, only gives up 4 yards per carry, has only given up 8 rushing touchdowns, and has only given up 908 total rushing yards, which is the 4th best in the NFL. Chubb, I mean, he did not look good. He didn't look bad in this game against the Saints, but against the bottom 5 rush defense, he barely put up any real statistical fantasy points. 11 rushes, 50 yards, and he didn't do much anything at all in the receiving game. No receptions there. I think he may have had a target, but Jerome Ford's going to be that receiving back there. I just don't expect him to do anything. Divisional matchup, they're probably going to be playing from behind, like I said before. So there's a lot more pass attempts, and with Nick Chubb not being that receiving back, Jerome Ford being that receiving back, I just don't see much fantasy value here. Even if it's a flex play option, he just had one of probably not this dream matchup, probably one of the best matchups he could have asked for against the Saints defense, who give up one of the most yards per carry. Like I said, for fourth most or fifth most rushing yards in total so far this year. Now he's going against the top five run defense, who hasn't given up any touchdowns really this year and barely gives up any rushing, or gives up less than 100 rushing yards a game.
So I have two sits, ironically, going on the Steelers side. First is going to be Russ. Yeah, Russell Wilson didn't have a great week last week. 205 yards, the one interception. It's back-to-back weeks with an interception, but I just don't think you need to look too much into it. I just don't really like the matchup. They're going on the road in a divisional matchup. They ended up winning last week and had success, and they're going to have failures in one of these games. They're not going to go win 3 division games in a row, let alone 4. This is their first of 2 matchups in 3 weeks against Cleveland on the road. This is obviously going to be a difficult game for the Steelers offense. The Steelers offense also has not looked great. I mean, they settle for a bunch of field goals, and that's kind of how their offense rolls. And it's acceptable, but what is that going to sustain moving forward? Their defense can only do so much, especially if I'm expecting the output that I am from the Browns offense as a whole. So Russell Wilson obviously doesn't provide the rushing value that Justin Fields does, even to the point where, Justin Fields came in for a play, hoping to seal the game, ended up sliding a little bit past or before the first down marker. But he's not going to run the ball. You're going to really strictly trust it in the air. And with 200 passing yards the last 2 games, an interception and 1.5 touchdowns, I just don't feel confident as a reliable option, especially going on the road in their first divisional matchup in the dog yard against a team that's struggling. And secondly, I'm going to go with Najee Harris. I mean, similarly, Najee Harris has had a pretty good season. Had 18 carries for 63 yards last week, 21 for 53 and a touchdown the week before that. He's just not an explosive running back. And I think the Steelers' running offense is not that great. Like, the offensive line is all right, but more for pass protection. Running, Najee Harris seems to never be able to have like that big game. He'll have it every now and then, but consistently. He's had games of 13 carries for 19 yards. He's had games of carries of 14 carries for 106 yards. You just never really know what you're going to get out of Najee Harris. And I think that's a bit concerning, especially going into that Cleveland front. Guys like Myles Garrett that you don't want to run into. Their excellent linebacking core. All in all, I think the Steelers really are going to showcase their offensive struggles. And I really think Najee Harris and Russell Wilson, being the two main aspects of leading that offense forward, are going to be guys that definitely struggle. What about any sleepers?
I have Cedric Tillman. I'm just going off what we've seen of him with Jameis Winston. Last week was his lowest in targets and receptions, 8 targets, 3 receptions, and lowest in our yards with 47. So not the best fantasy week you could have asked for. But if you look at the targets as a whole, since Jameis became the starter, 12 targets, 8 receptions, 81 yards. 9 targets, 7 receptions, 99 yards, 2 touchdowns. 11 targets, 6 receptions, 75 yards, 1 touchdown, and just last week, 8 targets, 3 receptions, 47 yards. I expect them to be back at those other numbers. One of the things with the Steelers is they've given up 206 receptions so far. Like I said, not many yards, not many touchdowns, but they give up a lot of receptions. And Tillman, who's been really good at catching the balls, at least for the targets that he's gotten, has been at 66, 77. He did have the 55% against the Chargers, but he still had a touchdown, 75 yards in that game, and then 37.5% against the Saints, being 3 for 8, 47 yards. I think he's going to be closer in between the Baltimore game and the Chargers game, right around 80 yards, have 6, 7 receptions. I don't know if he'll have a touchdown this game because they don't give up, the Steelers defense does give up receiving touchdowns, but I expect James to throw the ball a lot. And I expect Tillman, from what I've seen before, I mean, he's had multiple double-digit target games, and one where he's just 1 off and then 2 off. Next up, I'm going to have Russell Wilson. Like I said, I think early on, they're going to score a couple touchdowns. I think they're going to go up early. Russ has looked good since he's been the starting quarterback. Granted, last week, yes, was not the best. 205 yards, no touchdowns, to interception. But again, I'm going to trust the numbers what I've seen last couple against Washington, a pretty good defense. Was held under 200 yards passing, but three passing touchdowns, interception. 278 yards against the Giants with 1 touchdown, no interceptions. Against the Jets, a really good deep pass defense. 2 passing touchdowns, 264 yards. I think Russell Wilson throws for 2 touchdowns early on in the game. Can get you 250 to 300 passing yards. Who knows? He may give you a rushing touchdown. I think he has 1 on the year at this point. I think it was a sneak. I could be wrong. Yeah, he has 1 rushing touchdown. There's a chance he could give you that rushing touchdown once they get down to that goal line. I just think he'll have a good game. I think maybe towards the later part of the game, you may be a little more upset if you kept expecting to keep on scoring, gain more fantasy points. But again, he's a safe option as of right now. Last week was a bad week, but it was also a week that was a little bit interesting. First divisional opponent that he's faced, and it was against the Ravens, who has one of the best defense. Yes, they still are staying in the division, short week, but they're still familiar with Cleveland. Cleveland isn't as good as Baltimore.
So I have three sleepers. Two of them are on the Steelers side. The first being Jalen Warren. Yes, I don't think the Steelers offense is really going to have a great plan of attack, but I think Jalen Warren has the potential to be the better of the two backs, strictly because of his pass catching volume. Last week, 4 catches, 27 yards. He's going to get that 9 to 14 carries as well for anywhere from 4 to 60 yards. And I think that's going to be very good, especially for where he's at, rostered in 64.3% of leagues, averaging 6.8 fantasy points a week. Yeah, going to be kind of hit or miss. Kind of hard to tell with Jalen Warren, but I think Russell Wilson would look to guys like Jalen Warren, especially if he's struggling or if the defense is getting a good rush, things of that nature. I think Jalen Warren could be the next man up for them and really kind of develop as a good running back. I think the expectation is the team moves on from Najee going into this next year. But Jalen Warren, I think, is definitely going to continue to see his fair share of repetitions rise as Najee's kind of depletes. But all in all, I think this is a good, favorable matchup for him. Secondly, I'm going to go with Pat Freiermuth. Been a weird year for Freiermuth. I mean, I wasn't a big Freiermuth fan. I still am not entirely, but I think there's again potential for him to have success. I mean, that 1 week against Indianapolis was really his only good week. We had 5 catches, 57 yards, and a touchdown. But kind of similarly to Jalen Warren, when quarterbacks struggle, they usually throw to guys like tight ends and running backs. And I think these are the two guys that could really excel. Are these guys that I would maybe potentially start? Most likely not. But it's a kind of if you're in a need for a deep sleeper or you're kind of sitting in a position where your tight end's in a bye, I think Freiermuth could be a good selective option. And I always say tight ends do really well on Thursday Night Football, which is also why I'm going to go ahead and say David Njoku. Now, I know he is limited, as far as his injury is concerned due to a knee injury. So there is no guarantee that he's going to be playing this week. And we are recording this, early in the week. So no guarantee for sure. But last week, 9 catches for 81 yards, 19.1 fantasy points. Cincinnati in week 7, 10 catches, 76 yards and a touchdown. Week after, 5 catches. Week after, 5 catches. I mean, his last 5 games, he's had at least 5 catches. And I think that's very important for a tight end, especially for a guy like David Njoku, who was drafted a little bit later than people were maybe expecting. So I think this trend can continue. I think Jameis Winston's going to look for guys like David Njoku to step up to the plate. And I think, if the Browns attack is going really well, this could be a perfect opportunity for the Browns to look to guys like Njoku to step up to the plate and kind of help lead this offense in the right direction. Okay, and then any busts?
Yeah, so I have Jalen Warren. Like I said before, the receiving side hasn't really been much more in Warren's favor. Last week, he had half the carries. Najee had 9 there. Was productive, 4.6 yards per carry. He had 41 yards there, so it was solid. But like I said, in the passing game, they had the same amount of receptions. They both had 4 receptions. Najee had 30 yards. Warren had 27. It wasn't one of those things that he's been out receiving him. I think that the gap has widened, especially from last year, having that slower start to the year coming off that injury. I mean, Najee's took his opportunities, ran with it up to this point, and he's on pace to have another 1,000-yard rushing year. And again, I've always said it with Najee, he's going to get you 1,000 yards every year. It feels like it's just not going to be like the way that you expect him to. It's not going to be the huge flashy games. He's going to have a couple 100-yard games, and then he's going to sit right around 70 yards for the rest of the year. Get you that every week. And I think that's what this offense needs to rely on, especially with Russell Wilson being that type of quarterback who needs a lot of play action, needs a lot of movement in the pocket. Being able to have that consistent back that we've seen out of Najee week in and week out. We haven't seen it with Warren. We've seen snap count, I believe, also has gone down. I just don't expect it to have a great week this week. Also, still on that Steelers offense is going to be Darnell Washington. He's been picked up a lot recently from in one of my leagues, or a couple of my leagues. A lot of people have just added him, and it's because he had 2 receptions, 42 yards, which is career high on the yards. Had 4 targets. This is the second time having 4 targets with Russell Wilson. I just don't understand it. I get it. He's just physically a freak. I mean, he's a massive human being, 6'7", 264 pounds, playing the tight end position. But I'm a fan of Pat Freiermuth. I liked watching him with Big Ben. I thought that he was going to be one of the top tight ends for years to come. Hasn't really looked that way because they've used him differently. But this scheme that they run just really favors Fryermuth. I mean, it's schemed to just get guys open, and Fryermuth being that safety blanket there. Granted, he didn't have a good week last week. He did. He was received by Washington, only 2 receptions, 14 yards. Fryermuth has been a good receiving tight end throughout his career. It's more of just I've seen in two of my leagues I'm in that people picked up Washington like immediately or already put in waivers. They're asking me, hey, do you think I should pick up Darnell Washington? I'm like, I just don't understand it. It's just a bust. I mean, what we've seen out of him is 4 receptions, 36 yards. That's his best fantasy week that we've seen out of him yet. I don't understand the hype for him. I get it physically. He's different than every other tight end in the NFL, but he's not the best receiving tight end.
So I only have one bust, and it's Cedric Tillman. And I know I'm talking a lot about this high-powered Browns offense, but I think Cedric Tillman was definitely a disappointment last week, especially for the fact that Jameis threw for 395 yards, and Cedric Tillman only had 7.7 points, 3 catches for 47 yards. I think a lot of people expected Cedric Tillman to continue his sustained success that he has in week 7 through 9. I don't know what happened during the bye week. I really don't, but it definitely was trending in the wrong direction, especially after that Baltimore game. The last 2 games, he's been trending down, and I think I'm just a bit skeptical about it. I think also, too, the fact that guys like Judy, guys like Njoku have really established themselves as reliable options for Jameis Winston. I just don't see really too much area of improvement, per se, for a guy like him. I really don't think he's going to necessarily fit into the mix and fit into that rotation that Jameis is looking for, especially since he's rostered in 60% plus of leagues. I think people are under the assumption that he could be a hero, and he could. He certainly could because he was for those 3 weeks. But I definitely think this matchup against Pittsburgh, I would avoid him as much as possible, especially when we're getting down to crunch time. You need reliable guys, and the 2 reliable guys that I trust in the Browns offense is Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku. And Jameis Winston is not going to throw for 395 yards again. So if Cedric Tillman was not able to get the yards during that 395-yard game, what can you really trust him to get those yards from? I think those are some of the questions that I have moving forward. So that's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit skeptical about him as well. What about a game prediction?
I'm gonna have the Steelers winning this game. I'm gonna say divisional game third short week. Usually are a little bit closer. I'm gonna say 28-24. I think Jameis kind of leads them back in the fourth quarter. They have a little bit of a resurgence, but it just won't really end up being anything. I think they're still gonna lose.
I'm going to go ahead and say 28-19. I think the Browns do win this game. I think, the Steelers settle for 4 field goals. They find a way to get a touchdown. But I think the Browns overall have a great game. And I know the Browns are obviously not better than the Steelers, but Steelers are bound to lose one of these games. And they didn't lose to Baltimore. This is their first divisional test on the road. It could be a lot of challenges, especially for an offense that's sputtering. I think the Browns kind of offense broke through last week, and I think it continues to do so at home. And they're able to bring another win, which seems hard to come by for Browns fans this season. Well, thank you guys for listening to another episode here on The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter at The Truth as one to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy levels, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp through focused memory? Look no further than Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports AZ and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity while also maintaining ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.